Courage, the Cowardly Dog! Eustace and Muriel have won an all-expense-paid sweepstakes vacation to Miami. Muriel loves everything. Eustace hates everything. And Courage immediately wants to go home the second the news of the Bay Harbor butcher killings breaks. Courage is not even remotely interested in investigating the killings. He doesn't want to be anywhere near the vicinity, and his constant whining is almost enough to convince Muriel to leave. But right as she's about to give in, Eustace starts winning money at the slot machines, and he's adamant about staying and no longer wants to go home. It's by complete accident and Courage's rotten luck that Courage somehow becomes witness to one of the Bay Harbor butcher killings. And then by complete accident again when Courage recognizes Dexter at a crime scene or someplace while they're traveling around Miami. As soon as Courage recognizes Dexter, he screams, and then he frantically tries to warn Muriel or anyone that will listen that Dexter is indeed the Bay Harbor butcher. Unfortunately, Courage has very limited communication skills, especially when he's panicked, which is pretty much all the time, so no one understands what he's saying, and when Muriel asks what's gotten into him, it's likely Angel, Deborah, or even Dexter himself comes over and explains that he has a thing with dogs, which is actually true. Dogs, and in fact most animals, have an aversion to Dexter. Their primal nature makes them more sensitive to Dexter's predatory aura. So much to Courage's dismay, no one is really fazed at all when Courage goes ballistic and points fingers at Dexter. This is fine for a while. Dexter can safely ignore Courage for the meantime, but unfortunately, Courage doesn't really know that the people Dexter is hunting and cutting up are bad guys. So even though the temptation to run is strong, Courage probably feels honor-bound to stop Dexter from killing again. This starts a chain of escalating situations where Courage repeatedly interferes with Dexter's life and business, always showing up at the worst time to screw up Dexter's process. Things eventually escalate to a point Courage finds Dexter's butcher tools, which he tries to show Muriel or the police. And that's when things take a dark turn for poor Courage. The code of Harry that Dexter so carefully adheres to was designed around the killing of human beings. Courage is not a human being. Courage is a dog. And let's just say Dexter's dark passenger has a rough history with animals. When Dexter was a child and he didn't have a way to release his dark impulses, Dexter killed small animals. Harry wouldn't allow Deborah to have any pets at all because he was afraid Dexter would kill it. And he was probably right. As long as Courage remained an inconvenient nuisance for Dexter, he would just leave him alone. But once Courage becomes a real threat to expose him, Dexter has no qualms with killing an animal. Rule number 1 of the code is don't get caught. So sadly, Dexter kills Courage. John Wick! This is for Courage the Cowardly Dog, you son of a bitch! Dexter dies! Cole Phelps! Cole Phelps really has 2 strong things going for him as a homicide detective. His skill in basic forensic analysis, as well as his excellent ability in reading and interrogating people. Unfortunately, only one of these 2 skill sets will be of any use to Phelps on the Bay Harbor butcher case, and it's not going to be the one he needs to solve it. Phelps has plenty of experience examining body parts and telling their stories, and he has strong enough deductive reasoning to figure out the butcher's police force connection. But from there, the case starts to fall apart for Phelps. Without much to go on other than some circumstantial evidence, Phelps is only left with his interrogation skills. Now, normally, this is where Cole Phelps really shines as a detective, because if there's anything he really excels at over some of our other detectives, it's the fact he is a master interrogator. If Cole Phelps has enough evidence, even circumstantial evidence, and you're alone with him in a room, he will get you to talk. Once he realizes the law enforcement connection, Phelps likely stages a series of interrogations with Miami Metro personnel, and he grills each of them for information. And in doing so, he finds out quite a few little dirty secrets around the department. He interrogates both Quinn and Liddy and finds out they're both dirty cops. Phelps makes LaGuerta confess about some of her sexual indiscretions around the precinct. He finds out Matthews is seeing call girls on the side, and of course he discovers the fact that Angel is pretending to be on good terms with his wife when really they're separated and he's drunk every night flirting with strippers. Phelps is a good enough interrogator, he probably even gets Masuka to confess his internet search history.
He totally saw the shemale stuff.
But with Dexter, Phelps gets nowhere. You have to understand, Cole Phelps is basically the person Dexter has been training his whole life to fool. Cole Phelps is exactly the kind of detective Dexter's father, Harry, both warned and trained Dexter to be wary of in his life as a serial killer. Phelps's entire means of knowing what approach to take with his questions is his on-the-spot analysis of facial expression, body language, and voice tone. Cole Phelps is kind of like a human polygraph. He can detect extreme ranges in emotion that don't line up with the facts. But the problem for Phelps is that Dexter has been training his entire life to be the perfect chameleon. Dexter's simply too smart to be outwitted into giving away important information. And when poked, prodded, or put under intense pressure, Dexter remains cool, calm, and collected. This in itself may raise some flags for Phelps, but it's nothing really concrete to go on, and it's unlikely Dexter becomes the main focus for his investigation. Even in the event that he does, however, Phelps also has problems at home. He's not faithful to his wife, and he suffers from PTSD, all of which Dexter can exploit should Cole Phelps get to be too much of a problem. If at any point Phelps gets too close, Dexter can play some office politics and pull some strings to get the adultery charges filed by Phelps's wife publicized. And if that's happened already, then Dexter can goad Phelps into a fight like he did Dokes, then use his PTSD to stage a morphine or heroin addiction like he did for Rita's ex-husband, Paul. Either way, just like in his own story, Phelps gets both suspended and demoted, and Dexter gets away. Eddie Valiant and Roger Rabbit. If this were just Eddie alone, Eddie would get pretty close. Eddie is actually a very good detective on his own, and his investigation would most likely mirror Dokes' beat for beat. Eddie would sense Dexter's creepy vibe almost immediately. He'd start looking further into him, and so on, all the way through to the finale, where he confronts Dexter at the dock and his fate is decided by whether or not Eddie pulls the trigger on our dear old friend the Dark Passenger. But with Roger Rabbit in the picture, this doesn't happen. In the context of a serious human-on-human crime scenario, Roger is far more of a hindrance than he is an asset. Roger is and has always been a walking liability. He cannot help himself. That is the cartoon he was drawn to be, but it really doesn't do Eddie's investigation any favors. And it's likely Dexter doesn't even have to do anything to impede the investigation at all, because for every step of progress Eddie makes, Roger sets him 2 steps back. It's probably Roger's fault that the AC unit at the morgue gets destroyed, not Dexter's, and there's no telling what other kinds of similar blunders Roger will cause that will bring the investigation to a similar grinding halt. Maybe Eddie can hurt Roger's feelings enough to get him to leave him alone, but getting a cartoon character to leave you alone is a lot easier said than done. And by the time Eddie can get Roger to finally go away, Dexter will already have been given enough time to destroy any damning evidence and will have secured his path to freedom. Dexter gets away. Sherlock Holmes! Utterly bored by a growing stack of unsolved cases, none of which seem the least bit interesting, Holmes' interest for a good mystery are finally piqued when news of the Bay Harbor butcher killings becomes so sensationalized that even Holmes hears about them here in the London Morning News. Eager for a mystery finally worthy of his intellect, he flies to the States on a whim and basically insists his way onto the Miami Metro Homicide Task Force. Matthews absolutely despises him, but it's easy enough for Holmes to manipulate LaGuerta's political ambitions to allow him access to the investigation. From here, everything plays out similar to the way it did for Lundy for a time, filling his role for a while until Dexter's motives are called into question, then Holmes switches focus to Dexter specifically in almost no time at all. Probably even before the copycat killing case, which is where Lundy and some of our previous detectives originally got suspicious. Holmes's powers of deduction are so superhuman, they borderline on being an actual psychosis. And it probably takes no time at all for Holmes to notice even the slightest inconsistency about Dexter's facade, at which point he becomes the sole focus on Holmes's investigation. But unfortunately for Holmes, his massive ego and abrasive way of handling people doesn't do him any favors here. He's managed to snag access to this investigation through underhanded means, and it's likely the rest of Miami Metro Homicide doesn't appreciate being treated like idiots whenever Holmes points out the flaws in all their theories. So it's very unlikely he'll get any help help from anyone at Miami Metro when asked to help investigate Dexter, one of their own. This leaves Holmes to investigate Dexter on his own, and just like with Dokes, everything leads up to the confrontation at the Estrada dock. Unlike Dokes, however, Holmes is a master of Bartitsu, so it's entirely possible Holmes overpowers Dexter and arrests him right here. But Dexter is also an expert in jujitsu, and he's probably both bigger and stronger than Holmes is, so I give the edge to Dexter in this fight, who most likely subdues Holmes in the end. But it'd be a lot more difficult and more painful of a fight for Dexter than it ever was for Dokes. Even winning the fight, it's very likely Dexter has some broken bones and some serious bruises after this. Things play out the same as the original story for a while. Holmes toys with Dexter while in captivity using psychology. He doesn't manage to convince Dexter to turn himself in, but he also convinces Dexter Holmes doesn't even remotely begin to fit his code, putting Dexter in the same moral conundrum as he was in his original story. Things change dramatically, however, when Holmes escapes his cage. At this point in the original story, Dokes and Poirot from our previous tier selection were both desperate enough to call for help without fully assessing the reality of the situation, getting recaptured by drug dealers and ultimately back into Dexter's custody, where they eventually met their demise by Lila's hand. Holmes, however, has the deductive reasoning and situational awareness to understand that the only people that would be this near to a cabin in the wilderness half full of cocaine and body parts are probably threats. So instead of calling for help, Holmes stealthily slips away into the wilderness. Dexter is a forensic specialist, but he's not a wilderness tracker, and with the drug dealers nearby to deal with, Holmes has plenty of time to make it out and contact the police with his findings. Even if making his way out of the dangerous Florida wilderness takes a really long time, with Holmes missing and no way to find him, Dexter's clock has run out, and with his identity and personal life set for imminent destruction, Dexter either gets caught trying to escape Miami, or he successfully manages to go on the run, maybe with Lila somewhere in Europe, where Holmes is sure to follow. Either way, be it sooner or later, Dexter gets arrested. Detective Pikachu! Let's be clear. Floridian alligators do not count as Pokemon. That means Detective Pikachu's biggest asset as a detective, his ability to understand both Pokemon and humans, does not come into play here. And without that, all Detective Pikachu really has left is his deductive reasoning, which means it's still Masuka doing the heavy lifting in the forensics department, which gives Dexter plenty of time to hide and sabotage evidence like he does in the original story. Detective Pikachu has a high degree of both empathy and humor, both of which elude Dexter for the most part, so maybe Detective Pikachu kind of gets a weird vibe from Dexter, but it's nothing like the creepy feeling Dokes gets. So Detective Pikachu probably dismisses the feeling as nothing really important, and Dexter gets to continue on about his business relatively above all suspicion. Dexter gets away. Adrian Monk! Oh boy, this is going to be a rough one for both Dexter and Monk, because both of these guys are uniquely suited to make each other's lives an absolute living hell. Monk is like a human computer for crime solving, but he's not that way because of his brilliant mind in the same way someone like Sherlock Holmes is. Monk is that way because of his clinical pathology. He has severe obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, and a laundry list of phobias and compulsions give him a laser focus for even the slightest inconsistency in the evidence he examines or the crime scenes he investigates. Monk isn't a great detective because he's smart. He's a great detective because he literally cannot help himself. This is a man that sorts his garbage by color and food group, and has nightmares about being buried alive under trash bags, which right off the bat is going to cause him some problems considering the bulk of the evidence in the Bay Harbor Butcher case is literally body parts in a mountain of trash bags. Despite this, Monk's obsessive-compulsiveness is going to work against Dexter in a pretty significant way, because Monk's obsessive powers of observation means he'll be double and triple checking every piece of evidence, including Dexter's blood reports, for inconsistencies, and Monk will find them. So Dexter may be able to excuse away one or two of the inconsistency Monk finds as human error, but then Dexter won't be able to rely on falsifying evidence or crime scenes like he usually does, which is a big problem. Also, the scattered chunks and bones of the Bay Harbor victims are very much going to appear like a very messy, unfinished puzzle to Monk, so he'll probably have the victims' remains perfectly matched and categorized by himself in half the time Lundy's task force does on the original story. In a morbid way, Monk will probably even recognize and partially admire the neatness and exactness of how the bodies were disposed of. The one advantage Dexter has with Monk, however, is Monk is more socially awkward and behaves less like a human being than Dexter does. Monk is good with evidence, not people, so Monk does not pick up anything odd at all about Dexter's personality. But for what Monk lacks in social intuition, he makes up for with his remarkable eye for detail. Obsessed with figuring out the connection between the victims, it won't take Monk hardly any time at all to start seeing the serial killer connection. And this is where Monk's investigation hits its first emotional obstacle. The only time Monk is good with people is when consoling and promising to deliver justice to the victims of surviving family members. Because despite his social weirdness and compulsions, Adrian Monk is a deeply empathetic person within the context of the victimized. Monk himself lost his wife to murder, so Monk fully understands the emotional turmoil and compulsive need for justice that only a grieving widow can understand. But in this case, Monk is going to be quite thrown by what he finds. The conclusion that Monk comes to after an exhaustive round of interviews with the surviving friends and family members of the victims is going to reveal to him that all of the butcher's victims were murderers and serial killers, and this is going to be a major blow to Monk's psyche. Given his history, it's easy to understand that Monk has a particular disgust for murderers, so realizing all the victims in this case are the exact kind of scumbag that killed Monk's wife is certainly going to be a hit to Monk's motivation to the case. But ultimately, he finally decides a mess is a mess, no matter what the context, and it must be fixed. So, Monk continues on with the investigation, hits his next big major snag, and it's a big one. When Dexter sabotages the AC unit to the outside morgue in the original story, it's a pretty big hit to the task force's investigation. Lundy is not happy about it, neither is anyone else. But with Monk at the helm instead, Monk is absolutely destroyed by this. All that evidence, all those bodies Monk spent hours or perhaps even days sorting and categorizing, all rotted and putrefied in a single night, all thanks to the Miami Heat and careless garbage men. This incident is going to send Monk into a full-on panic attack, which is really bad for Monk because this is where Dexter will start to see the weaknesses in Monk's pathology that Dexter can learn to exploit to interfere with the investigation. Monk is in an inconsolable state of mind from the morgue incident for a while, but everything changes when he finally connects the dots to the butcher's role in law enforcement, and Monk's compulsive mind may even connect on a thread that no one else has picked up on, in that Monk's compulsion-driven paranoia may even make him begin to suspect the AC unit incident was an intentional act of sabotage. Once Monk has this thought in his mind, he goes full-on paranoid. He starts looking at all the incident reports and former casework of pretty much everybody that works in Miami Metro Homicide, and given it's likely Dexter and Monk have already butt heads on some shoddy blood work, Dexter is likely on Monk's short list of people to investigate. And this is really bad for Dexter. Like Lundy, Monk will find a case where Dexter's blood work allowed a murderer to walk free. And even though Lundy found only one case, Monk's compulsiveness will force him to look even deeper, and it's likely Monk finds several incidents where Dexter's findings are either inconsistent or very suspect. Our dear friend Adrian now goes hard into investigating Dexter's past, and just like with Dokes and later Deborah, he'll go digging through the evidence room in the city archive to find everything about Harry Morgan, Lara Moser, the newspaper article, the interview tapes, and probably even the connection to the ice truck killer. At this point, Monk pretty much knows Dexter is in fact the Bay Harbor butcher, but he just doesn't have any physical conclusive evidence to prove it. And now this is where Dexter and Monk make each other's lives a living hell for a while. Like Dokes, Monk follows Dexter's every move. But even worse than Dokes, Monk triple checks every single report Dexter files and probably does everything in his power to hinder and limit Dexter's ability to basically do anything. Being watched like a hawk both in life and at work, Dexter's need to kill starts festering and makes him more and more agitated and unstable. But equally, at the same time, Dexter also knows exactly how to make Monk agitated and unstable. Outside of his obsessive compulsiveness, Monk has an insane list of phobias. This is a guy that only drinks certain brands of bottled water because he has a phobia of tap water. Even though Dexter's not going to be able to goad Monk into attacking him like he does Dokes, he can still achieve the same result without violence. Because there are a million different ways Dexter can trigger and exploit Monk's phobias and compulsiveness to throw him completely off balance. Probably to a point Monk eventually just snaps and starts throwing a full-on tantrum in the station. Adrian Monk is already weird, neurotic, and doesn't have that many close friends at Miami Metro. So it won't be that hard for Dexter to call Monk's credibility into question by exploiting Monk's mental issues and making him look and sound like a complete nutcase. Which, let's be honest, Monk can sometimes do on his own even without Dexter's help. This forces Monk to investigate Dexter pretty much by himself. And without much evidence left to sort through, he just decides to continue to follow Dexter for a while until he finally catches him doing something nefarious. Eventually, Monk does catch Dexter at the Estrada dock, but Monk does not play this scene like anybody else so far. Adrian Monk is not exactly a brave and courageous guy. Monk is not a man of action by any stretch of the imagination. And even though he technically has a gun, it is very unlikely Monk confronts Dexter on the dock at all. Witnessing Dexter load the body bags onto the boat is just confirmation of everything Monk suspects. And instead of confronting Dexter, Monk just stays hidden and watches Dexter leave before looking for evidence in the cabin. Even if he doesn't find any evidence, Monk now knows for a fact that Dexter is the butcher. And despite how good he is, even Dexter makes mistakes, like little Chino. And when Dexter does make a mistake from here on out, Monk will be there to jump on it before he can cover his tracks. It may take longer than he wants, and he'll have to live with the reputation of an exiled police detective with mental issues for a while, but eventually, Monk will stumble upon the evidence he needs to prove Dexter's guilt. And one way or another, Dexter gets arrested! Shotaro and Philip! This is basically the equivalent of Dexter being investigated by Adrian Monk and Hercule Poirot at the same time. But they also have access to the Bat computer, and if they get pissed off, they fuse together to form RoboCop. This all basically means Dexter is 6 ways of screwed from Sunday, and he stands absolutely no chance at all. Miami is completely foreign territory for Shotaro and Philip, so Shotaro's intimate knowledge and relationship with the local Futo community is not going to be of much help here on the other side of the planet, but that doesn't really matter, because Philip has the Gaia library with all of Earth's knowledge in his brain, which is probably a little more reliable than the broken tape player in Miami Metro Homicide. So Dexter has no opportunity or time at all to delete the footage of himself wiping down his boat with bleach from the marina security camera. Philip just instantly finds it, and then with a blink of an eye, Philip will just have all of Dexter's family history. He probably even has access to Vogel's damn interview tapes with Harry about the code in Dexter's childhood. Dexter doesn't even know those exist yet, but Philip will have it in a few minutes. Without even remotely needing to hinge into Cyclone Joker or let alone double, the case of the Bay Harbor Butcher is pretty much a cakewalk for the Futo detective duo. Dexter gets arrested. End of Part 3! Yes, I realize that this video might have been a few detectives short of the previous parts, but I also spent a really long time on the Adrian Monk section, which I'm pretty happy with. And hopefully you are too, and don't mind the slightly lower number of detectives in this video in lieu of a more in-depth examination of how those two characters interact. That wasn't necessarily my intention when I wrote out all of these in what now feels like forever ago, but what can I say? Some characters just happen to have some more interesting interactions with each other than you might think when you start writing it out. And in this case, I thought Adrian Monk and Dexter matched each other's freak, so it wound up being a little longer than usual. Speaking of surprises, I'd like to thank all of you for getting the channel up to 10,000 subscribers already in just a period of 3 months! That is nothing short of incredible in an era of YouTube where the vast majority of people, including the algorithm itself, actually discourages you from subscribing to the channels you like. So I cannot thank you all enough for the incredible growth in such a short period of time. And for those of you that haven't subscribed, now would be a good time to enable the notification bell, because I'm gonna start doing something that allows you to actually contribute to these videos. Hundreds upon hundreds of your comments and good suggestions have finally convinced me to start petting out the roster of Dexter's dear foes. And starting within the next few days, I'm going to start running community polls once or twice a month that allows you to vote on what detective to add into the next Dexter Versus video. So enable those bell notifications and be sure to check back regularly with my channel to see and contribute to the channel's content. And as always, these videos require a lot of music and film footage that the YouTube copyright system isn't always so fond of. So any support you can provide by becoming a channel member or buying a super thanks would be most graciously appreciated, as it both encourages and incentivizes me to spend more and more time on this kind of content, which I love doing, and eventually I'd love to work on this channel full-time with your support. But anyways, I and it seems like a whole lot of other people still have that Dexter bug in their system, and as long as that's true, you can look forward to more and more Dexter content. So stay tuned for that and much, much more. Thank you all for watching. I'm Phantom Savage. Good night and Godspeed.